Hello, and welcome to our podcast episode number 88, From Ice Age to High School, a caveman's journey into modern life. I'm Timothy, and I am here with my old friend Thomas. Today, we are going to talk about Encino Man. Encino Man is a 1992 American comedy film directed by Les Mayfield about two teenagers named Dave Morgan and Stony Brown who discover a caveman Link frozen in an ice block in their backyard.
They thaw him out and decide to keep his presence hidden from everyone else.
As they try to help Link adapt to modern life, he teaches them valuable lessons about friendship and acceptance. So, Tom, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, Timothy, I thought it was quite amusing at first. You know me, I'm always up for a good laugh. But as the film progressed, I found myself actually caring about these characters and their predicament. It really struck a chord with me, especially when Link had his moment of clarity regarding his lost tribe. It got me quite emotional.
Oh, please, you're just saying that because it has Brendan Fraser in it.
Well, I do admit he does make a handsome caveman, but it's the story itself that really drew me in. It's about acceptance, Tim. Accepting people for who they are, regardless of their appearance or origin. It was just the right amount of slapstick and dry wit to keep me giggling throughout the whole movie.
Oh, please. The only thing that made me laugh were Pauly Shore's cameo appearances. He always steals the show. Don't you agree?
Well, I do admit he was entertaining in his own peculiar way. But let's focus on the movie, shall we? What did you think about Link and how he adapted to modern life? I thought the scene where he tries to use a toilet for the first time was priceless.
Oh, Tim, me and my love for historical accuracy. It would be impossible for someone living in the Ice Age to just, you know what I mean. But seriously, Tom, the whole premise of the film is absurd. A caveman from the Ice Age waking up in 1992 Los Angeles. It's preposterous.
Well, Timothy, dearest, that's what makes it so fun to watch. Besides, who hasn't ever wished they could go back in time and change some things? I mean, imagine being able to warn your younger self about all the fashion choices you made in the 80s.
Oh, Tom, don't get me started on that subject.
Anyway, moving on.
What about the romantic aspect of the film?
Do you think Dave and Robin were actually meant to be together?
Or was it just because Link liked her?
Well, Timothy, dearest, I believe that love transcends time and space, don't you? It's not about whether or not they were meant to be together. It's about how they felt for each other in the moment. And let's face it, Link's approval can be quite persuasive. As for Robin, she does seem to grow more appreciative of Dave as the film progresses, especially after her relationship with Matt Wilson becomes less and less satisfying.
Oh, please, Tom, you do realize that this is a comedy, right? They couldn't possibly have a serious romantic subplot in a movie like this. Besides, I thought the real love triangle was between Link Stoney and Dave's sister. What do you think about their dynamic?
Well, now, Timothy, my dear, I must admit that there were some interesting moments between those three characters. But ultimately, it's a film, and sometimes the plot needs to be creative to keep things interesting, right? Besides, who doesn't love a good old-fashioned bromance between Link and Stoney?
Well, Tom, I must admit that their chemistry did make some parts of the movie more bearable. But let's move on to something more interesting, shall we? What do you think about the ending? You know, the part where they all dance in the club. And then everyone believes that Link is a caveman.
Oh, Timothy, dearest, it was fitting, don't you think? After all the chaos and misunderstandings, the characters learned their lesson about acceptance, friendship, and embracing change. And who doesn't love a good caveman-themed dance party?
Well, I do admit that it was a bit unconventional, but at least they didn't have Link and Stony. And, well, let's just say the ending could have been worse. Anyway, Tom, my dear old friend, we have spent enough time discussing this absurd film. Don't you think it's time to move on to our next topic?
I suppose so, Timothy, dearest. But before we do, let me share with you a little-known trivia about the making of Encino Man. Do you know who originally turned down the role of Link?
No, Tom, I don't know. I actually tried to avoid this movie as much as possible. So please enlighten me.
Well, Tim. It was none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger himself. Can you imagine the Austrian oak playing a caveman? It simply doesn't compute.
Well, Tom, I am quite shocked. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Caveman. It does sound like it could have been an interesting crossover. But let's move on to our next topic, shall we? What do you think about the impact of Encino Man on the comedy genre as a whole?
Well, Timothy, dearest, I think Encino Man did bring something fresh and new to the table when it was released in 1992. It combined elements of the buddy comedy with a sprinkle of time travel and even a dash of romance. It's not groundbreaking cinema, but it did manage to entertain audiences for generations.
Generations. You do realize that nobody watches this movie anymore, right? It was just a one-hit wonder. But moving on, let's talk about the cast. Besides Brendan Fraser, who else do you think stood out in their performance?
Oh, Timothy, dearest, I thought you would never ask. Besides Brendan Fraser, of course, I thought Sean Astin and Pauly Shore brought their prime game to the table. Shore's portrayal of the dim-witted but lovable high school student was hilarious, and Astin's character journey from a selfish teenager to a more empathetic and caring individual was quite impressive.
Tom, I suppose you can't deny that Pauly Shore always brings the laughter. But what about the director? How do you think Les Mayfield did his first feature film?
Well, Timothy, dearest, I must admit that being his first feature film, Les Mayfield did an acceptable job. He managed to balance the absurdity of the premise with enough heartfelt moments to keep the audience engaged. However, there were some pacing issues, and the CG hasn't aged as gracefully as some would hope. But overall, it was a decent debut for Mayfield, who went on to direct other successful comedies like Bringing Down the House, starring Queen Latifah and the late, great Mr. Smith.
Well, Tom, we've spent quite a bit of time discussing this gem of a film. Don't you think it's time we moved on to our next topic? After all, there are many other films and TV shows from the 90s that deserve our attention.
Indeed, Timothy, my dear, indeed. But before we go, let me leave you with one last piece of trivia about Encino Man. Did you know that during filming, Brendan Fraser actually got lost in the woods while shooting a scene and had to spend the night in a real-life igloo he built himself? Now that's dedication to his craft. Oh my, I did not know that, Timothy. That just goes to show how much Brendan Fraser was immersed into his role as Link. Speaking of which, let's talk about the script for a moment. Although it had its fair share of slapstick humor and campy moments, I believe that it also tackled some deeper themes like acceptance and belonging.
Well, Tom, I have to admit that there were some heartwarming moments in the film, but overall, I found the script to be a bit too simplistic and predictable. It seemed like every character arc was resolved within the span of one scene, which made it difficult for me to fully invest in their stories. Additionally, I felt like the humor was a bit forced at times and didn't always land as intended.
That's an interesting perspective, Timothy, dearest. While I do agree that some of the character arcs were wrapped up rather quickly, I believe that this film was meant to be more of an escape from reality than a deep exploration of complex themes. It was supposed to be fun and entertaining, which it certainly achieved for me. As for the humor, I think it's important to remember that this is a comedy from the early 90s. Audiences had different expectations back then.
Well, Tom, I suppose you have a point there. After all, Encino Man was released at a time when movies like Wayne's World but moving on to another aspect of the film, let's talk about the direction. Les Mayfield did an admirable job with his first feature film, but I can't help but feel that there was room for improvement when it comes to pacing and setting up certain scenes. What are your thoughts on this matter?
You know, Timothy dearest, you make some valid points about the direction of Encino Man. While Les Mayfield did a decent job overall, I do agree that there were some issues with pacing and scene transition. There were moments where the film seemed to drag on for longer than necessary, while other times, important plot points felt rushed or underdeveloped. However, I believe this was partly due to the fact that he was still finding his footing as a director and had yet to develop his unique style that would later shine through in films like The Whole 9 Yards and Money Talks.
Tom, you've certainly given me something to think about regarding Les Mayfield's direction and the overall pacing of Encino Man. It's clear that this film was a mixed bag of both strengths and weaknesses. Despite its flaws, I must admit that there were moments where I genuinely laughed out loud or found myself feeling nostalgic about my teenage years watching movies like this one. So while it may not be the greatest comedy ever made, it certainly has its charm and can still provide some entertaining viewing for those who are willing to suspend their disbelief for a couple of hours.
Exactly, Tim dearest. Encino Man is far from perfect, but it's a fun and light-hearted film that brings back fond memories of simpler times. It may not have the same cultural impact as other 90s classics like Clueless or The Sandlot, but it definitely has its place in cinema history. And who knows, maybe if we're lucky enough, we might get a reboot or sequel that addresses some of these issues and provides us with more laughter and adventures involving our favorite caveman and his friends.
Well, Tom, I suppose we can't deny the chemistry between Brendan Fraser and Ernestine as Link and Stoney. Their budding friendship was one of the highlights of the film. I also thought Mariette Hartley did a fantastic job as Doctor. Sarah Monroe bringing depth to her character's journey of learning to accept the impossible.
Indeed, Timothy dearest. Brendan Fraser really nailed the role of the innocent and naive caveman named Link, who had to adapt to the modern world. His physical comedy and facial expressions were priceless. And Ernestine was perfect as his best friend and guide through the 90s, playing the part of the slightly nerdy but lovable teenager Stoney. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and their friendship really shone through on screen.
But what about Richard Masur as Mr. Wilson? He played the strict and demanding father who ultimately learns the true value of family and acceptance, didn't he?
Oh yes, Tim dearest. Richard Masur portrayed the stern but loving Mr. Wilson magnificently. His transformation from a cold and uncaring father to a warm and understanding father was heartwarming to watch. It just goes to show that sometimes we as parents can get caught up in our own worlds and forget about what truly matters most.
And how could we forget about the beautiful and talented Megan Ward, who played Robin Slingerland? Link's love interest, her character arc from a shallow and self-absorbed teenager to someone who learns the value of true friendship and love was handled well by both the writer and her performance.
Indeed, Timothy dearest. Megan Ward did an incredible job portraying Robin, a teenage girl navigating through the tumultuous years of high school. Her journey from being consumed by popularity to finding true love and understanding was a delight to watch unfold on screen.
And what about Michael DeLuise? He played the dim-witted but lovable character of Duke Link's other best friend. His comedic timing and delivery were spot on, adding a much-needed comic relief throughout the film.
Oh, my Tim dearest. Michael DeLuise was perfect as Duke, the clueless but loyal sidekick to both Link and Stony. His antics and one-liners had the whole audience in stitches, providing much-needed comic relief during the more emotional moments of the film. His chemistry with Fraser and Austin was undeniable, and they truly became a trio to be reckoned with on screen.
And last but not least, there's the youngest member of the cast, Ke Huy Quan, who portrayed the wise and resourceful character of Chang. His knowledge of ancient history and Chinese martial arts added an interesting cultural element to the film.
Indeed, Timothy dearest. Ke Huy Quan was fantastic as Chang, Link's wise and mysterious friend who helps him navigate through the modern world. His calm demeanor and wisdom beyond his years were a welcome contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. His martial arts skills were impressive, adding a touch of action and adventure to what could have been a purely comedy-driven film.
Well, Tom, it's getting late, and we still have several other films and TV shows from the 90s to discuss in future episodes. Until then, I bid you good night.
Good night, Tim dearest.
Well, Tom, I suppose we can't deny the impact that Encino Man had on pop culture and its influence on future films and TV shows. The film's mix of comedy, romance, and adventure has inspired countless imitations over the years, with many attempts to recapture its success. But none have quite managed to replicate the charm and chemistry between Brendan Fraser and Sean Astin as Link and Stony.
Indeed, Tim dearest. Encino Man was a cultural phenomenon that not only inspired countless parodies and spoofs, but also paved the way for a resurgence of the buddy comedy genre in the 90s and beyond. The film's mix of humor and heartfelt moments struck a chord with audiences worldwide, proving that a simple premise executed well can still resonate decades later.
But what about the artistic influence itself? Can you think of any specific scenes or moments from Encino Man that have been referenced or homaged in other works of fiction?
Oh, there are countless references and homages to Encino Man in popular culture, Tim dearest. The iconic scene where Link tries to use a toilet for the first time has become a classic comedy bit that is frequently parodied and parodying. But perhaps one of my favorite tributes came from the animated sitcom Family Guy in their episode A Fish Called Stewie, where Stewie Griffin, the baby genius, accidentally travels back in time to prehistoric times and is rescued by a caveman named Link, who teaches him about modern conveniences like toilets and flushable wipes.
That's a funny example, Tom. And speaking of references, did you ever notice how the character of Duke, played by Michael DeLuise in Encino Man, shares similarities with another famous character from pop culture?
You mean the iconic slacker and stoner character of Dude from the cult classic film The Big Lebowski?
Indeed. The resemblance is quite striking, don't you think? They both sport long flowing hair, love to relax, and have a penchant for using unusual slang.
That's rather uncanny, Tim dearest. It just goes to show how influential certain characters and moments can be in the world of pop culture. And who knows? Perhaps future generations will look back on our own beloved discussions about films and television and find their own hidden references and homages to us and our shared passion for cinema.
I doubt it, Tom, but one can always dream. Well, that wraps up our discussion about Encino Man tonight. It's been a journey filled with laughter, tears, and countless debates about the film's merits and shortcomings. But ultimately, what truly matters is that we shared this experience together, reminiscing about our own teenage years and reflecting on how cinema has shaped us into the passionate cinephiles we are today.
Well said, Tim, dearest. And with that, we've come to the end of our journey through Encino Man. While our opinions on the film may have differed somewhat, it's clear that there's still a lot to love and appreciate about this classic 90s comedy. From Brendan Fraser's unforgettable performance as Link, to Sean Astin's endearing portrayal of Stoney, and the chemistry between them both on screen, it's easy to see why this film remains a cult classic even decades later. And let's not forget about the rest of the talented cast members who brought their top game to this project, including Mariette Hartley as Dr. Sarah Monroe, Richard Mazur as Mr. Wilson, Megan Ward as Robin Slingerland, and Michael DeLuise as Duke. Each character played a crucial role in shaping the film's narrative and adding depth to the overall story.
Indeed, Tom. And while we might have our nitpicks and gripes about some aspects of the film, it's important to remember that Encino Man was released during a specific time and cultural context. It aimed to provide audiences with a lighthearted escape from their everyday lives in AM. In that regard, I think it succeeded quite well. So in conclusion, while Encino Man might not be the cinematic masterpiece some have proclaimed it to be, it certainly has its moments of brilliance, humor, and heart. It's a film that transcends generations and continues to resonate with audiences worldwide.
Well said, Tim, dearest. And now, before we close out this episode, let's address one last thing. We love hearing from our viewers and subscribers, so please leave your thoughts, opinions, and memories of Encino Man in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that little bell icon to get notifications of our future videos. Until next time, film fans,